The Civil War had ended, but peace never truly came. In 1865, in the small town of Pulaski, Tennessee, bitter ex-Confederates gathered in secret. What began as a club of defeated soldiers quickly mutated into something darker, a white supremacist army determined to erase the Union's victory. They called themselves the Ku Klux Klan. Cloaked in ghostly robes, they rode at night, spreading terror across the South. They whipped, tortured, and lynched freedmen who dared to vote. They burned schools and churches to the ground. They hunted down Republican officials and assassinated them in cold blood. By the late 1860s, the Klan had unleashed the nation's first homegrown terrorist campaign. Thousands of black men and women were murdered, not only for claiming their rights, but simply for daring to exist with dignity. Union veterans became marked men. In North Carolina, White Outlaw, a black town councilman and former soldier, was dragged from his home and hanged. In South Carolina, Jim Williams, once enslaved, now a militia captain, was lynched for organizing his people to defend themselves. The Klan thrived in the shadows, preying on the defenseless, but soon they would discover that not everyone feared the hood. As the smoke of the Civil War cleared and the South bled from defeat, the nation faced a question. What would freedom look like for 4 million newly emancipated men and women? While the Ku Klux Klan plotted in the shadows, the United States Army took a bold step in the open. In July of 1866, Congress passed legislation to create 6 new all-black regiments, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, and the 38th through 41st Infantry. For the first time in American history, black men were written permanently into the structure of the peacetime army. The men who filled these ranks were not ordinary recruits. Men were veterans who had worn their Union blue through the crucible of war. Men who had marched through mud and blood from Antietam to Appomattox. Others were newly freed men, some barely months removed from slavery, now seizing their chance to stand as soldiers of the United States. They were led by white officers. They were given worn-out uniforms, second-hand rifles, and tired horses. But what they lacked in resources, they made up for in grit. These soldiers had already endured a lifetime of hardship. They knew that every mission, every patrol, every battle was more than just duty. It was proof that black men had a rightful place in the heart of the Republic. On the frontier, that proof would soon be written in legend. The American West was vast, unforgiving, and violent. Wagon trains rolled through endless plains, settlers carved out of towns. Railroads cut steel paths across deserts. And in this cauldron, the Buffalo Soldiers became the thin line between survival and chaos. They guarded simply routes, escorted stagecoaches, protected railroad crews from raids. They built telegraph lines that stitched a young nation together. They chased down outlaws and faced hostile bands across Montana, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was here that their enemies gave them a name, Native warriors. Struck by their courage, their relentless fighting spirit, and their coarse, woolly hair, called them the Buffalo Soldiers. To the tribes, the buffalo was sacred, powerful, enduring, untamed. And so the name was no insult. It was a title of respect, a recognition that these men fought with the same ferocity and strength as the great beasts of the plains. The soldiers embraced it. To be a Buffalo Soldier meant carrying the burden of proving every single day that black men could fight and die with honor. By the late 1800s, 1 out of every cavalryman on the frontier was black. Together, they fought in at least 177 engagements of the Indian Wars. Their courage was tested again and again, often against staggering odds. In 1867, fewer than 70 Buffalo Soldiers stood their ground against nearly 900 attackers, a mix of native warriors and bandits. Outnumbered more than 12 to 1, they refused to break. When the smoke cleared, it was the Buffalo Soldiers who still held the field. Their victories were carved into history, not only in the West, but in the very idea of America. The Buffalo Soldiers became a symbol of perseverance, courage, and dignity under fire. But as they built their reputation on the frontier, another battlefield was calling, one much closer to home. Because while they defended the nation's borders, America's first terrorists were waging war against black freedom in the South. And soon, the Buffalo Soldiers would be called to face them. As the Buffalo Soldiers carved their legend on the frontier, their brothers in arms and fellow veterans faced a different kind of battlefield, the South itself. If there was one thing the Ku Klux Klan feared above all, it was armed black men, men who had fought for the Union, carried the pride of victory, and refused to bow again. White supremacists understood a hard truth. These soldiers would never return quietly to second-class status, and they were right. Across the Reconstruction South, black Americans organized militias and even volunteered freemen rifle clubs to defend their families, schools, and ballot boxes. Many were led by Union veterans who drilled their men with precision and discipline. Their mission was clear: to meet terror with resistance and to avenge the Klan's atrocities with steel and lead. The confrontation was inevitable. In Arkansas, the Klan's night raids grew so violent that Governor Powell Clayton raised a state militia, many of them black troops, to crush the insurrection of 1868. When the governor declared martial law, these men marched into Klan strongholds with rifles and bayonets ready. In one operation, they stormed the town of Center Point and captured 60 Klansmen in a single sweep. That same fall, General Daniel Upham's black militia clashed with Klan guerrillas near Augusta. Shots ripped through the night as the two forces collided. When the smoke cleared, the Klansmen were dead, captured, or scattered in panic. Across Arkansas, similar malicious actions led to hundreds of arrests. By early 1869, the Klan in the state had been beaten into silence. Its reign of terror broken by men it thought it could intimidate. The message was unmistakable. The Night Riders had finally met opponents who did not run. Meanwhile, the fight escalated to the national stage. Outraged by mounting Klan atrocities, President Ulysses S. Grant unleashed the full power of the federal government. The Enforcement Acts gave authority to wage war on the Invisible Empire. In 1871, Grant dispatched 1,000 U.S. soldiers into the very heart of Klan country, South Carolina's upcountry. Leading the charge was Major Lewis Merrill of the 7th Cavalry. His men, hardened veterans, some fresh from the frontier, rode through the dark pine woods, hunting Klansmen like outlaws. They raided secret dens, hauled leaders into custody, and shattered the Klan's networks. Within months, hundreds of hooded terrorists had been captured, tried, and imprisoned. The Klan's so-called Invisible Empire collapsed into dust. Its Grand Wizard fled into hiding. Its rank and file deserted or disappeared. By 1872, the original Ku Klux Klan was broken. America had won one of its earliest victories against domestic terrorism. And at the heart of that victory stood black soldiers, from state militias led by freedmen veterans to the Buffalo Soldiers, whose very presence in the U.S. Army sent a message. The defenders of the Union came in all colors. The Klan had set out to terrorize black America, but when confronted by disciplined, battle-tested black men with rifles in hand, it was the Klan that trembled. The Buffalo Soldiers' triumphs against America's first terrorists were only the beginning. After Reconstruction, the all-black regiments carried the flag into nearly every conflict the nations faced. On the frontier, they became the backbone of the U.S. cavalry. Through the 1870s and 1880s, they fought in the Indian Wars with relentless discipline and courage. Prejudice dodged their every step, yet on the battlefield, they earned respect. 25 Buffalo Soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor during this period, their heroism carved into Army history. By the 1890s, their name had become legend. When war broke out with Spain in 1898, the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry were among the first deployed. In Cuba, they stormed the heights of Queto and San Juan Hills, fighting the shoulders to shoulder with Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders, though it was often the Buffalo Soldiers who led the way. At El Caney and Santiago, their grit under fire turned the tide. Even President William McKinley praised their role in victory. From Cuba to the Philippines, from chasing Pancho Villa with Pershing in 1916 to serving abroad in World War I, the Buffalo Soldiers proved again and again that patriotism and skill knew no color line. For nearly 90 years, from the ashes of the Civil War to the dawn of World War II, these men fought two battles at once, one against America's enemies overseas and another against the racism they endured at home. Segregated regiments finally ended in 1948 when President Truman ordered the integration of the armed forces, but by then, the Buffalo Soldiers had already carved their legend deep into the nation's story. Their legacy is one of resilience, courage, and defiance. They tamed the frontier. They stood against the Night Riders of the Klan. They fought for a nation that did not always fight for them, and still they endured. In the end, the Buffalo Soldiers did more than terrify America's first terrorists. They proved that freedom would be defended by those who once had none. The sight of black men in Union blue rifles in hand, standing tall against lawlessness and hate, sent a message across generations. The enemies of liberty could not break them. The Buffalo Soldiers secured their place in history as heroes who upheld the promise of American democracy with unyielding faith, iron discipline, and the courage to face any foe.